Hey guys, what's up? We're back with another deck guide. So this time we're going to be going over Turbo Sjeuani. Here's the deck, and let's go ahead and break it down before we jump into a couple of Masters Ladder games and see how we do while, talking about our plays and stuff. So the premise of this deck is really simple. It is a Sejuani build around. Basically, we are going to be trying to level Sejuani as soon as possible, and this deck is often going to have her leveled as soon as turn 6. So when she comes out on 6 or 7, she will usually be leveled if you have had a pretty good curve. So to level up Sejuani, we use a lot of the early poke tools to get little pieces of damage through in pretty much every early turn. Prowling Cutthroat is great 3 for this deck for that reason, just kind of allowing these little chips to get through to enable all of your plunders. Then we've got Make It Rain, the Bilgewater staple. This serves as a kind of like a multifunctional, bit of a semi-board clear as well as trigger for Sejuani. Monkey Idol is actually pretty great in this deck. It's a card that was seen as a meme card for a while, but it's been used competitively in this deck very well. Ever since it got this 5th point of health, it's actually doing quite a lot. And of course, all the usual suspects like Parlay, Warning Shot, and Hired Gun. Pretty much everything you'd see in every Bilgewater build. To go into a couple of these more specific decisions, though, we are running Babbling Bjerg in this deck. The reason for this is pretty straightforward. We need a tutor, a way to reliably get the Sejuani into our hand, as well as the Riptide Rex. So in this build of the deck, the Babbling Bjerg can only draw units of 5+ power, so it'll draw Sejuani or Riptide Rex every time. So 50-50 to pull one or the other, depending on how many you've already drawn. Next, we've got Yordle Grifter. This is effectively an Allegiance deck. We are going to be, trying to hit this Allegiance. It doesn't matter that much, Yordle Grifter, compared to other Allegiances, like the nab effect from this doesn't end up deciding games, but the ability to create warning shots for how this deck works is really, really, really essential, because when Sejuani is leveled, she will basically frostbite the entire enemy board every single first time you damage the Nexus. So what's going to happen is when you have the leveled Sejuani, all you have to do is fire off any warning shot, or sometimes even a Parlay or a Prowling Cutthroat, and the entire opponent's board is frostbitten and can't do anything at all. Our next finisher is Riptide Rex. Riptide is a super powerful card. You guys know Riptide. Basically, all this says is on turn 8, your opponent knows this is going to come down. I will warning shot or parlay or something into the Riptide. And it's a great way to kind of just punch through the opponent's board. Last but not least, we've got Twisted Fate. Now, a lot of people like Gangplank in this slot instead, but I'm quite personally preferring Twisted Fate. And there's, kind of like a split camp, like a lot of people are in the Gangplank camp, and a lot of people are in the Twisted Fate camp. The Twisted Fate camp is basically, the idea behind it is because Gangplank is blocking your Bjerg from being able to pull more important tools, and ultimately, he's good at kind of like accelerating the game plan, but somewhat of kind of like a big dumb body that isn't necessarily able to do a ton, especially against like stuff like opponent stuns that might come out. Twisted Fate gives us a little bit more flexibility and a little bit more versatility. Being able to use him for red card or gold card is a really great opportunity, especially against more aggressive styles of opponents' decks. So that's this deck in a nutshell. Now, why should you play this deck? Well, this is a pretty quintessential mid-range list. The way it's built in this case ends up leaning, even if anything, a little bit towards the control-y end of the spectrum. Now, to demonstrate what I mean, let me go ahead and pull up this little snippet from the bottom of my website page for the decks and meta, which is kind of like the aggro triangle, as we call it, right? Like, aggro beats combo, combo beats control, and control beats aggro. And mid-range is kind of on the spectrum between aggro and control. This deck would be kind of like right around here, mid-range leaning control. And what that means is we're very good against aggro, but we're pretty weak against, like, some of the slower combo decks, and we're not even necessarily good against the control decks because, we lean mid-range. But this deck demolishes aggro, and that is the single best thing about it. So if you're playing on ladder, you're seeing a lot of stuff like Misfortune Scouts. Even stuff like They Who Endure is also, it's like kind of like a hard deck to classify, honestly. They Who Endure is kind of a bit of a few things at once, but most of its scariest draws are aggro draws. When it has a hand that just, really shoves into you super early, we're going to do great against that kind of thing, especially with the Twisted Fate version here. here. So if you want to just like beat down on people on ladder running aggro, this is an absolutely perfect deck for that. Alright, and finally, before we get into our first game, I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about the mulligans. Now, how this deck works is we really want to mulligan aggressively for our early options, those being Jagged Butcher, Parlay, Prowling Cutthroat, Hired Gun, Make It Rain, Monkey Idol, and Petty Officer. These are the most important cards for us to hit. Now, Black Market Merchant is a low mana cost, but we don't often want to be keeping it in the opening hand because it's a draw power card. We want that later. And Warning Shot can be alright in opening hands, depending on the matchup and depending on if you have, something to work with it, like, for example, Butcher. And lastly, we often aren't going to be keeping 4 mana cards in our opening hand because we're going to be drawing them later, and we really just want to make sure we have the solid opening presence that this deck needs to kind of like start snowballing out of control, because we need to be counting up those Sejuani triggers really quickly so that our win condition can come online. Alright, so we're getting into our first game here, and we actually hit a perfect matchup. This is Elise Darius, they're a pretty aggressive deck. This is exactly what I'm talking about when I'm saying we've got a nice aggressive deck. So we're going to go ahead and kick Sejuani because she's a little bit slower, and as I just mentioned for the mulligan, we want to keep Jagged Butcher and Make It Rain. We're going to do something pretty interesting with this Twisted Fate though. We're going to look at who's attacking on which turn. I'm attacking on odds, which means he's attacking on evens, right? Now, because he's attacking on evens, we can use Twisted Fate for red or gold to punish his development on turn 4. So we can actually go ahead and keep this Twisted Fate. Combined with the fact that we already have our kind of like early turn plays, this is going to be a really great option for that. So his deck is usually going to be playing a Spider on turn 1 that doesn't necessarily want to block. We have a few opportunities here. We can go for the big Warning Shot, and against the aggro deck, this is actually probably going to be our best bet. So just getting a 3-3 on turn 1 against this kind of aggro is actually a really big deal. You're not always going to want to go in for the super aggressive Warning Shot here. There's a lot of games where we will want to kind of like save the Warning Shot for later, or just happily play the Butcher as a 2-2. But in this case, just because, he's a very aggro deck, we can happily take that Warning Shot there and just get a 3-3 on board. A 3-3 will do absolutely lovely into this matchup. We can go ahead and Make It Rain here before he attacks, because once he declares the attack, the Saboteur deals the 1 damage. And here's the biggest strategy with any sort of like Sejuani build around deck. We really need to make sure we're triggering Sejuani every unique turn, right? We want to make sure we are pinging the Nexus on every possible different turn we can, because we need to hit 5 to level her up, and we want her leveled by 6 or 7, so that allows us to miss 1 or 2 turns, but we have to be damaging at least 1 damage to the Nexus for the rest of those other turns, okay? So in this case, we can go ahead and Petty Officer and summon a 1-cost follower. So what we've got here is basically a nice wide board. Oh, House Spider there. Okay. We can go ahead and attack with this Yeti Yearling. This is actually a pretty interesting attack. We don't really need wide blockers, and we just want to get the Sejuani trigger off. He also might feel like he can't block with the House Spider because the Last Breath isn't completely irrelevant, but also it sets up for the Twisted Fate red card. Okay, we can go ahead and force the Grenadier to block, which, hey, feels pretty good. I mean, the Grenadier having to block that is definitely not a great thing for him. And we still have enough units white here to make his attack pretty awkward. So, Stalking Shadows. Usually, this gets followed up by House Spider, Elise. Maybe, depending on the version he's running, he could go for a Stygian Onlooker sort of board. Oh, shit. Excuse me. Alright. So he goes for a pass here. I'll just pass back to him. He wants me to play a card before he does anything. And if he's going to burn one of my points of mana as the aggressor here by passing, I'm perfectly fine with that. I'm playing fully reactive here. He really doesn't have a good attack on this board at all. And I just don't want to let him get under my Twisted Fate, right? We want to force the Twisted Fate out first. Alright, this is pretty perfect. And if we want to, we do have a gold card here, which does make his attack at least a little bit awkward. Really not too awkward in this case. We will do something a little bit different. Just because gold card isn't amazing, we can go ahead and red card here, just to go ahead and get that 1 damage to the Nexus Sejuani trigger. The thing about the situation is, like, for instance, Kidder is actually pretty good against us there. We wanted to red card, and his attack is still not great. It's still only dealing 3 damage to us here, but I was expecting him to usually play something that loses a bit more value to red card here. The Skitterer was great. Red card would have countered a lot of basically anything else he could have done, like House Spider or Stygian Onlooker, usually just feed a lot more value to red card, but he's dealing the 3 damage here. Okay. So one really important aspect of this deck is to not play overprotective of your Twisted Fate. This is not really a Twisted Fate deck. We're not really trying to level up the Twisted Fate, right? I can go in and just swing in here with these 2 units, make sure we get our chip off. But the Twisted Fate level is just not really at the top of our priority, right? So, you know, even if the opponent had a pretty good blocker and Twisted Fate was at more risk and could get blocked and could die, I would still take this attack, right? You still just attack with your Twisted Fate just to try to... Sometimes the opponent can't block anyway because they feel like it's too risky blocking a quick attack, even though their unit is bigger. So you can sometimes get in like free attacks like that, but mostly we just want to make sure we're dealing chip damage whenever possible. So this is pretty great. The opponent, basically, they're aware of my win condition Sejuani, and they're forced into a really awkward play just to stop the level trigger from happening, right? They have to use Fervor on their Skitterer on my TF, and they're the aggro deck, keep that in mind. So this is a really weak Fervor. Redevelop House Spider. And that's really funny. We get the Yeti Yearling off of the Babbling Beard. I'm super happy to play this out now. We had, what was that, a 33% chance for the Yeti to come in there, and it showed up. Unexpected synergy. So in other Shadows, normally his deck at this point, yeah, their big threats are stuff like Frenzied Skitterer and then just like a big Fearsome attack, but because of how tanky our blockers are, we're really not too worried about that. We feel pretty happy about the situation here. It's an Ephemeral Legion Saboteur, so that's not really going to be dealing too much damage. We have good ways of blocking down his entire board. In this case, we can try to go as wide as possible with Petty Officer. Let's actually instead though, because we're not going to need that many units, we could Babbling Beard. You know what? We have to assume his hand is going to make us need units. Let's just go ahead and go wide. His hand could have like a lot of 1-drops and make us actually need to have a 5 wide block. And, you know, because he's aggro, we do have to be very careful. So let's go ahead and make that assumption and go for the Officer instead here. I mean, we do know he's got, you know, at least another Saboteur. And it's very easy for his hands to just be full of 1-drops that he would just vomit out here and make us need 5 units. Okay, so we do want to make sure we're kind of like hitting everything and open attacking in a really powerful way. I think in this case, sacrificing our unit is actually not going to be as worth it. We can go ahead and damage our enraged Yeti by 2. He's not really going to be running anything that punishes our Yeti from being low, especially since, again, he's the aggressor here. If he uses a spell or something to kill the Yeti, that's great for us because it's just spell damage that isn't hitting our face. Okay, so in this case, still pretty behind on our combo. You know, the opponent's slowing it down, but we've got a pretty nice open attack that should make his options pretty awkward here. He doesn't really have like massively great blocks to this attack. Yeah, he's just kind of like trading down the board, and he's actually ending up fairly low. He might just get fairly blown out here, right? He's trading off 3 of his own units, and at this point, he really needs to be thinking about, you know, something like developing Darius. He needs to be thinking about, honestly, I don't really know how he wins. It's pretty awkward for him. So we do want to, you know, see if we can Sejuani on the Frostbite on his Darius. He'll probably play the Darius out now. No Darius. Okay, yeah, I was gonna say, I got it off of Unspeakable Horror. Man, what could that get? I don't think there's anything, like, truly scary from that. So, in this case, we can just go ahead and play our other Yeti. This Yeti was harder. This one was, what, a 20% chance? Because we have 2 Sejuanis and 2 Rexes in our deck. Okay, so we can play the hired gun here. There's a bit less of a purpose because, you know, we will have a full board at that point, and we kind of assume he's about to play Darius into the Sejuani. We can just go ahead and pass here. So, actually after a pretty slow start, we had a pretty good opening hand, but our next couple of draws really didn't, you know, pan out. His Saboteur is going to set us into the Darius flip range, but that's also really not going to matter here too much, so I'm fine with that. And in this case, I guess our Sejuani can just Frostbite on defense. Yeah, this is a pretty weird game for sure. His attack is not great here, especially since, you know, we do have the ability to go on the offensive. Okay. So I'm pretty happy just doing the hired gun here. At this point, this is a very like topsy-turvy game where we drew 2 Yetis off of 2 Bjergs, and we whiffed drawing like 5 Sejuani triggers in a row, which means I guess we're just gonna basically just punch through here to win. Seems to be what we're doing. And there's a few different ways to do that here. The Make It Rain top deck does make it a little bit simpler though, in just going ahead and seeing if we can hit Nexus here. Oh, he just surrendered. Okay. Well, that was a really weird first game. Alright, I'm just gonna go ahead and get into the next game. Really, honestly, not too much to say about that. That's kind of how aggro as an archetype works sometimes, where like it derails your deck so much to the point where your combo's not really going off and you're just kind of just ending the game out with your bodies. But yeah, super irregular. Okay, this one should be a little bit more interesting. He's playing deep, and we have actually a pretty alright opening hand. We don't have too much of a reason to keep Warning Shot in the opening hand. We've got Twisted Fate as well as Yordle Grifter, but deep is a matchup where the flip Sejuani should actually do extremely well into. We have to be pretty worried about some stuff he could play, like Vengeances though. In this case, the Twisted Fate is going to be quite a bit less useful early, as well as the Yordle Grifter. What we're really going to want in this early game is the units that are going to help us get these Sejuani triggers out as much as possible. That's perfect. We just want, this is a great hand, we just wanted 1 Cutthroat, and you know, the Make It Rain on top of that, even better. So, if he had played Dreg Dredges, we would have been really happy to parlay it there, but since he didn't, we'll skip turn 1 instead. So, we're looking to level Sejuani quickly, and we're counting our damage. We're seeing if we can get the ping in on 2. Ping in on 2 works. And the tricky part is basically with this, you want to be using your spells during the defensive turns, right? Kind of an interesting situation. You know, you don't normally care about black market merchanting very early at all, but honestly, there's actually no better use for our mana here, so why the hell not? Okay. Bit of a trick against deep. When they have Thorny Toad, usually you just kind of ignore it completely. Alright. So he's going to go ahead and pass here with 3 mana open. We do really value trying to level up the Sejuani here, so I might just go for like a parlay or Make It Rain on face, especially with like how this hand is looking. Getting like that little defensive trigger is really, really nice. In this case, the Make It Rain is getting pretty low value. I'll be pretty happy to play it out here. The one downside of Make It Rain is it usually lets him play Jaw Hunters. The only problem with Jaw Hunters is Jaw Hunters doesn't actually really do anything against us. Like, it would feel so bad for him to actually try to play Jaw Hunters here, because all he's killing is like a Merchant or a Cutthroat. But if he does, we can take the parlay. And, you know, using both spells on the same turn is kind of awkward, but it ends up working well for me because we would have needed to do it anyway. Usually when deep passes on, when Bilgewater passes in early turns, like when they open pass, when they pass on turn 2, that usually means they have Hired Gun on the attack turn, and when they pass on turn 3, that usually means they have Jaw Hunters on the attack turn, right? In this case, though, I'm totally fine using both of my spells as long as I'm committing them to the defensive turn, because it's the offensive turns where our Prowling Cutthroat's going to get her ping anyway, and on top of that, our deck is full of these pings, so like we just drew Twisted Fate. This could even be used for the, you know, defensive turn ping should we need it. Alright, so our Sejuani's 3 out of 5, much better this time, and our TF wants to be used reactively on defense. We can just go ahead and get a Cure of Bjerg. We don't actually really need to be banking mana for Withering Wail against a board state like this. Usually how this next turn goes is he'll develop with a Sapling and then we'll just red card it. Red card's not going to do an amazing job here. But it'll kill the sapling off for free, which is nice, because the sapling's just kind of this annoying free unit. Alright, and you can see how this deck just so quickly is able to level up the Sejuani in these kinds of situations. So this is a pretty interesting one for me, the Dead Bloom Wanderer. What this means is if he actually plays another unit before attacking, we do get to parlay it, which is nice. Okay. It's a very free red card. And this is just a beautiful play, right? It's a great red card for this situation. You know, we're able to shut down everything. This is a large part of the reason why I like Twisted Fate over Gangplank, because just being able to, you know, shut down the early aggression, trigger an extra, you know, tick on the Sejuani is really, really nice, and ends up making quite a big difference in most games. Okay, so he's attacking with the Dead Bloom Wanderer here. I honestly don't really mind just letting that hit me, because my Sejuani is probably just going to be flipping with the freeze later anyway. So I'm not sure if there's any value in actually killing the Wanderer here at the exchange of one of my units. I could do it on the Black Market Merchant, since the Black Market Merchant is kind of valueless for later anyway. And, you know, his health matters. This deck doesn't really play aggressively early, but, you know, when the sea monsters start coming out, the pressure is going to be on us to close out the game. His life is going to matter. We can just go ahead and take this block. That's fine. Okay. So, it is looking like it is Sejuani time. Now, the one downside of playing Sejuani here is that a lot of hands would just Vengeance it. Vengeance is a really slow play for him, so it's not really going to feel amazing. Like, that'll set his game plan back quite a bit. And if he doesn't have Vengeance, he can be pretty screwed here, but it is kind of the one downside to the situation. There's also some hands that could go in for a Ruination here.
I'll be quick.
Okay, so the sequence is going to matter quite a bit here. How Sejuani works is when she's leveling up, she basically will, the first time I deal damage this round, she'll go 5 out of 5 and level up. And the second time I deal damage this round, she'll trigger her first leveled up ability, right? So we want to make sure the elusive is going out the left side because combat goes left to right. And then we can swing in like this over here. His pass is usually a Vengeance. It's kind of the only thing it can be. Okay, makes sense. And now we're going to be closing out the game with, you know, our other tools. We do have Babbling Beard, of course, to pull either a Sejuani or a Rex. And even if that pulls another Rex, hey, we're just double Rexing. There's nothing sad about just double Rex being our win condition instead of Sejuani. Especially when it forces his Vengeance. But yeah, Vengeance is a really powerful card in this meta right now. It's actually super underrated. I'm surprised more people aren't running it. It's basically Shadow Isle staple right now. Like, I've even seen, like, one of Vengeances in Endure, and I actually quite like that right now. Okay, so, it's deep on turn 7. He's going in for a Stalking Shadows. These are the... Ooh, I just disconnected from his Stalking Shadows. Something went wrong contacting the server. Don't lose an action here. Alright, so he's Stalking Shadows and then pass back to us. Basically, this is a sign that... usually it means he's about to, like, shove his Nautilus on the board. Unfortunately, we don't really have great counterplay to Nautilus. He might feel like we're about to play another Sejuani and he might pass. If he plays Nautilus, which he should, then we don't really have a great counter because we don't have the Sejuani. But by passing here and potentially bluffing second Sejuani, some players might actually go for a different approach than Nautilus on this turn, depending on the hand state. Abyssal Eye. Yeah, playing Nautilus, like, too early here doesn't even really make that much sense, honestly. And we have a pretty good board for countering the Abyssal Eye. Sapling won't do too much into us. If we want to, we can go, like, Babbling Beard into Withering Wail would be pretty fun. But a really big thing is here, like, enabling the Riptide Rex is going to be really nice. So what we could do instead is Yordle Grifter and maybe try to set up the Withering Wail like that, right? Now, this fish will be hitting our face, which is a little awkward, because even if we whale the sapling, it's still going to drag probably our elusive. That's probably going to hit the fish here. But I might actually have his sapling pull a TF instead. We'll have to see. But yeah, let's go ahead and Yordle Grifter here. This is just a better option than Beard in this case. Unfortunately for us, we get a completely useless card from him at the same time as whiffing... Oh, no, wait, that's... I don't know why. Sorry, I'm having, like, some late night issues It's basically a whiff allegiance, though. Yuck, dude. Alright, so pretty scary. He's got the Abyssal Eye, that's going to be a 6-6, basically just punching us in the dome here, and he'll definitely drag the cut there to that point. So losing 6 health, but typically no big deal. Oh, he is favoring the TF. Oh, beautiful. And that's so good for me. That's so good for me. Like, even if I didn't have a way to protect it, this is still absolutely great for how my deck wants to work versus his, right? Like, the TF is really not that much of a threat at all. I might actually not even care enough to whale here. The whale, honestly, the other thing though is this is kind of the best whale we're getting, and this will probably at least force him to do something else to deal with the TF later. You'll also note one nice thing about this whale, which is it kind of sets both of his remaining units to an even number of health, 2 and 4. And Riptide Rex, of course, each cannon barrage does 2 damage, so we like setting everything to an even number of health. So it's the 8 mana turn against, you know, Bilgewater, and you know what that means. Basically, Rex is coming down. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and Rex here. There's not really any business to slow playing the Rex in this case. We are just going to go ahead and kill his 2 units before anything else happens. We're a little vulnerable to a couple of responses. Like, there's some deep decks that can take a Ruination in a position like this. It slows down his entire game plan, and we're not out of resources if he does. So, I'm pretty fine with that if it happens. If he Vengeances, he's taking a lot of damage. If he Nautiluses, he's taking a lot of damage. Also, most deep decks don't run Ruination. It's like, I wouldn't love it if he Ruinated me, but for something that's such low odds, I'll accept it if it happens. Okay. So he summons the spider there. Basically, that means he's just about to play, you know, a unit, and he wanted to develop the blocker without costing an action, right? Which means he has to Vile Feast on the chain. Usually, he's just about to Nautilus or something. Okay, Devour. Going ahead and eating the Riptide. Looks fine. And in this case, it looks like it's one of those games where our TF level up might actually end up happening, and I'm perfectly happy just kind of like playing a bit of a slower game plan, just seeing if he even does level up. Let's go ahead and pass here. I mean, we don't really have any reason to take this attack anyway. So, we have a pretty interesting game. It's a bit unfortunate. He was able to kill our Sejuani for free, and we only have Bjerg giving us a 50-50 chance at the second Sejuani. Wow. Takes a pass here. Now, the thing about Deep is they always have pretty ridiculous options. There are some hands that take that pass basically just for fear of Sejuani and Sejuani alone. The one downside with me passing back right now is, so we're going to 10 mana next turn. If the Bjerg draws me Sejuani, then that's fine because I can Bjerg Sejuani next turn, but if it draws me Rex, I need to Bjerg this turn, which is quite awkward. He also might get forced into, you know, something that does something to the Rex. I think I will just Bjerg now. It's really cute and cheeky to think about like locking him out of an option here, but the Bjerg now is just a little too good to not do, unfortunately. Hit the Rex. It's the less preferred one of the two for sure in this case. And this is why I've actually experimented with running 2 Rex in, you know, 2 Rex and 3 Sejuani and some other versions of this deck. Ultimately, I could see 2 Rex, I could see 3 Rex. But as nuts as a card as Rex is, mostly this deck just wants to be drawing into Sejuani. Like, the Deep matchup is such a free matchup for this deck if we have the ability to, you know, just freeze the board every turn. And he usually doesn't have more Vengeances than I have more Sejuanis. Okay. This is pretty free. He doesn't really have anything amazing to play out here. We want to make sure we're not losing too much value. Like, Abyssal Eye is probably going to punch us, and that's okay. I'll just Hired Gun in this case. Like, he can't really punish our wide board at this point, and it looks like we're just kind of going for the aggro strategy now and trying to punch through. Yep, there's that Abyssal Eye. So we only need to draw 1 additional card for this TF to level up, which is pretty funny. So, our TF goes to 7 out of 8 here. We've got the Vulnerable on the Devourer. We do have the ability to, you know, Rex here, see what we get potentially. If we're going to Rex, we do want to do it before he plays Nautilus in particular. Nautilus would kind of ruin things a little bit. So we would need to Rex basically right now before he has a chance to do anything else. And a Rex right now looks pretty great. It is just a lot of value, shuts him down in a pretty immense way. I'd love to get the spider out of the way. You know, I'd love to like make it rain and then give him the action and then Rex. But as soon as he gets the Nautilus down, it's just a huge sponge for these cannon barrages. And the thing is, he's playing as if he doesn't have Nautilus in his hand, which is true. But he just drew 2 cards. His deck is short. Very, 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 very short. And on top of that, wow, he actually is running Ruination. Okay, so he might actually win. He took a pretty good Ruination. We do have a bit of redeveloped damage, but it might not necessarily be enough here. Okay. So we're going to have to see what he does, you know. We have this little bit of punch that we're going to need. And with Parlay and Make It Rain in our hand, he's actually at just incredibly low health here. The only problem is this completely useless Jettison that we got off of the nab, which really, really hurts here. And I guess he's going to have to use Nautilus so that, you know, he doesn't just die to his own thing. Alright. This looks like the better Make It Rain we're getting. The rest of his deck is just champions. He's not, you know, milling himself off of it. And he will play a flipped Maokai, which might make it pretty hard for me to close out the game at that point. Man. Very unfortunate. Alright. Yeah, it looks like he's pretty much in control here. We're just going to be a little bit short, and even if he doesn't have healing at this point, our deck might not really have a way to punch that out. It just comes down to the rest of his hand. He's probably going to have like 1 or 2 more sea monsters. Dude, we're so close here, man. If this Jettison was like anything else. Pool Shark is a kind of insane hit off of that. That feels really, really good. We do have a chance. We do have a chance. And we did see one thing earlier. I don't know if you guys were paying attention. But we did see one of his tosses earlier did get rid of Atrocity. And usually that deck is running 1 Atrocity. It can run 2. But it does mean we're a bit less worried about Atrocity, which matters a lot. Lie. Well, we're gonna have to see how good our double draw is here. Unfortunately, against like the deep deck right now, the fact that we're on turn 12, you know, we've only drawn 1 Sejuani, we don't have 1 on board or anything like that. Like, even with a double draw, I feel like our odds are just quite behind here. Like, the deck basically needs to be sort of like a snowballing, right? And we've come to a halt. We'll play it out a few more turns though. Right, Monkey Idol and Jagged Butcher. Yeah, unfortunately, this is not going to be useful. That is the game, as it were. So, pretty unfortunate. I think that usually that matchup, in my experience, goes quite a bit better, but that's fine. Just kind of like losing to only having drawn 1 Sejuani, and him running a good version of the deck. I think a lot of deep decks are very, very sub-optimized. I would say good deep players are running usually 1 or 2 Vengeances, and 1 or 2 Atrocities. Like, that's pretty important in the current meta right now. And I like the 1 Ruination. I'm running 1 Ruination in my deep version as well. So that is actually a pretty optimized version of deep. And of course it would be because, you know, we're queuing in high ladder. All right. So here's the final game here. And this is going to be a pretty refined deck. This is Leona Diana, and it's basically the full Targon synergy archetype package, right? They're running Allegiance. They're going to be running only the Shadow Isles isn't in, like, you know, any of the Nightfall cards. Usually it's just 1 card, Unspeakable Horror, from the Nightfall package, but it's a full Targon deck archetype. And we have a pretty great opening hand. In this case, we actually don't need Warning Shot so early. We just want to make sure we're getting like the Cutthroat, the Hard Gun, and the Monkey Eye. It looks great. I don't even mind getting the Sejuani just because we have a made hand already.
Out before they know they're bleeding.
Alright, so I will say you know, Leona Diana, this is actually one of the best decks in the game right now. It is very, very good, especially at a high level. It's basically like a non-trolly version of Aurelion Sol, effectively, right? Like, they're playing a lot leaner of a game plan, and it's going to be a lot more flexible with just kind of like the full invoke package, the full stun package. It's going to be really, really hard to punish, and it's sort of like super slow game plan there, right? Takes a pass here. We don't really have a great response to that pass. I'm actually pretty happy skipping this damage turn. So that'll be the one turn we don't deal the damage. And here's our damage here. Unless he plays for an Unspeakable Horror, but Unspeakable Horror is kind of hard to do off of an open attack. And we're going to Monkey Idol here. We have to Monkey Idol instead of Black Market Merchant. We'll Black Market Merchant later. It's fine. But yeah, the Monkey Idol does have to be the one that comes down right now, because we just need to get the rest of the triggers. Okay, so the Sejuani is going to level really fast here, and that is going to be a big problem for him. Like, his deck shouldn't really have major answers to the Sejuani unless he's able to invoke into the Obliterate for it right away. Which he's got decent odds of for off of Solari Priestess, but normal invokes should have really low odds of finding, you know, the Comet that they need. The early game one, the 6-mana Comet. But yeah, this is why the Invoke deck is one of the best decks in the game. It's very, very difficult to play. You have to pilot it super well, but it's incredibly flexible, and you're usually just going to get some, a couple of, like, you know, the Obliterate cards are absolutely super, super, super good from that pool. Yeah, we can just go ahead and play out our other Monkey Idol. That's honestly looking pretty fine here. He doesn't really have too much of an attack. Alright, so we're already getting the damage this turn, because the Powder Monkey will die at the end of this turn, so it counts as the damage for this turn. Which means we don't really need to, like, parlay or anything like that. We could if we just wanted to engineer a bit more aggression, a little bit better of an open attack, and we are pretty much committed to open attacking into him. Let's go ahead and save our parlay, though. We really just want to make sure we have as many triggers as possible, because once these Monkey Idols fade, we're probably going to need them for, you know, the Sejuani stuff. So we have some pretty great attacks here. We do pretty much want to be open attacking into him. Our development really sucks, so let's just get our attack in here. Usually, if we develop, he'll just stun something with Leona for free. But this is actually a pretty scary amount of damage that he'll have to answer. And, you know, they've got star shaping and stuff, so it's not going to be that hard for him to answer it. Oh, God. The other Mountain Scryer. Man. Oh, that's nasty. We could get pretty blown out. Let's see what we get off of Nab. The Nightfall card. That one's quite interesting. Being able to trigger Sejuani with it might actually end up being the play. What we have here is an interesting situation. We actually have one slot left on our board because one of our Monkey Idols is going to die and replace itself with a monkey, which means we can play something like a Hired Gun here, trying to be a little bit more mana efficient. We could also Horror and kind of see what we get off of that, depending on, you know, how important it is to save it for one of the triggers. Let's take the Hired Gun, because being able to make one of the Mountain Scryers vulnerable is kind of nice anyway. Okay, so we have just enough board space for both Powder Monkeys here. So he's got to heal up pretty soon. There's the Golden Sister. Alright, that's going to be healing him. So, because we're, you know, going for the aggro strategy here, the most important thing to do is basically to just straight up not let him heal. I think because of that, we're basically forced into playing the Sejuani here. And because of this exact board state, because he's got, you know, an elusive blocker, I actually feel like the Cutthroat has kind of done its job at this point, and I can go ahead and replace it. So let's go ahead and freeze this lifesteal. So what he's going to need now is the Comet, which he can play for 4 mana here because it's being double discounted by the Mountain Scryer. If he's got it, then we're going to have to play the other Sejuani next turn. He didn't use Solari Priestess, so his odds of having it aren't high here. I believe the odds of getting any specific card off of a random invoke is something like 13%. It's quite low. Okay, so he's playing the Sejuani out now. This is sorry, not Sejuani. He's playing the Diana out now. It's kind of interesting because, you know, we do have the ability to fully flip the Sejuani here. I think I might just go ahead and parlay the Priestess at this point. He might be interested in going for a Pale here. I mean, his options all kind of suck, but I'm never gonna need to Frostbite the board, right? Like, if he wants to deal the elusive damage in here, he can. Yeah, he can kill the Monkey Idol if he wants to. That's fine. The elusive damage doesn't matter here because we're the aggressor, so it's never really going to matter to me, like my own health. We just need to be able to kill him before our strategy runs out of steam in this case. Okay, so our Sejuani is going to be taking the flip here, and then we're just going to be activating its effect next turn. Seems good. And we're just making sure we're saving our maximum resources for this, right? We want to save the extra triggers for its like full board freeze effect in the hand here, right? So we can Parlay Face, we can Unspeakable Horror. We can do a lot of things just to make sure we are freezing everything. Now, we don't necessarily need to open attack because he's got a full board. It's a little bit harder for him to punish us out, but we do still expect potentially, you know, Leona could come out overriding something and stunning our Sejuani if we don't open attack. So, what's to do here? Well, in this case, I quite like the idea of, yeah, trying to take the open attack. I really do not want to let him get any, you know, big value on something like Leona. I want to make sure the Sejuani is threatening the damage all the way through. And we're going to go ahead and open it up with Make It Rain here while dragging his Mountain Scryer with our 2-3, because this is the thing we want to deal damage to. So the Make It Rain didn't actually need to hit Nexus there. We got, I guess, a little bit lucky in that it is hitting Nexus, freezing his board. Sejuani will freeze the board here. If it hadn't hit the Nexus there, we would have chained to it Unspeakable Horror, which would have hit the Nightfall effect, Nexus, and activated everything we needed to activate about the Sejuani here. So this is pretty perfect. I can't really use Fury of the North here because we have to assume he's got a way to deal with the Sejuani. So the Make It Rain activates, freezes the entire board, and then we get a nice, you know, free cleanup here, basically. Okay, perfect. And if we want to, we can finish off the Mountain Scryer, depending on, you know, what we might be afraid of. These invoke discounts are actually going to be scary. Yeah, I'm pretty terrified of his deck. Usually he's going to have a Star Shaping here. Okay, so we do have, you know, plenty of fast speed responses to anything. I think I do just want to go ahead and parlay off the Mountain Scryer in this case. It's pretty vulnerable. There's a lot of things he can do to that, like Pale or even Guided Touch. Yeah, I still have no choice. This still has to be the best play here. If he Pales, we can Horror it. Horror's going to be a little bit too value here, though. But the discount is actually just, like, way too powerful on this board state right now. Well, that was weird. Animation just lost, like, a frame there or something. What the heck? I'd love to basically just try to rush down face, but the biggest problem on this board state is that he's going to have Star Shaping. Like, he's not really at 4 health right now. He's just kind of, like, floating the mana because he knows he needs to use it to keep himself alive. He's really got a lot more health than this. Okay, so we do want to make sure we're going a little bit wider here. I'm pretty happy to play out the other Petty Officer. There's not really too big of a downside to this. In this case, the Powder Keg is not quite doing enough. There's most random followers aren't doing a great amount either, but in this case, going wide is helpful, and you have a chance of hitting a big follower like Pool Shark that can bail us out.
Raise your weapon, Sunwind.
All right, so what do we got here? His Diana is going to be trying to level up. We just wanted like Nightfall Face to activate the Sejuani, which makes sense. So I think the best play is to just Hired Gun here. It activates the Nightfall. It keeps us enough mana to replay Sejuani. If he kills the Sejuani right now with the Obliterates, which is by the way quite likely, we'd need to replay it. And yeah, just making sure we have the Nightfall to go face at that point. Okay. Interesting. I'm just gonna let this happen. So Spell Shield doesn't protect it from the Sejuani effect because it's not a skill or a spell, it's an ability. Alright, he's got Unspeakable Horror, my Black Market Merchant. Perfectly fine.
Find your path in the dark and follow no false light.
If he might think that the spell shield protects it from the from this, which would be pretty unfortunate for him. So he might like go in with Nightfalls. If he has like a Nightfall heavy hand, he could try to kill the Diana here. It's fairly easy for his hand to have like second Pale. There it is.
Our light grows brighter.
And second Pale puts the Diana to a total of 7 here. And if it goes in to threaten the Sejuani, and you know the spell shield doesn't end up protecting it from the Sejuani Frostbite's smash effect, that would be pretty bad for this guy.
No more lies.
Ooh, Cygnus, interesting.
So it has come to this.
All right, so yeah, he's threatening a little bit of elusive value here. We're not going to be able to like block or threaten it anymore. 13 damage is quite a bit. Let's just go ahead and make that 0. Yeah, there we go. All right, so this looks pretty good. I mean, we do need to be dealing damage to the face anyway. And our health does actually matter, you know, I mean, to a point, right? It's like we're not the aggressor, but going down to 3 health isn't really good here. And usually we're in a good position to draw at least another trigger here. Crescent Guardian is actually a pretty solid play in this case. It's got Overwhelm, which means it does have the ability to help trigger Sejuani on our open attack. So we're going to completely need to open attack here. This is an absolutely imperative open attack. We cannot just give him the ability to play anything at slow speed. It would just be really, really pointless here to let him do that. So yeah, we do want to make sure we are freezing out the board. That's kind of like the single biggest thing. So a big problem is Hush at this point. And if he hushes the Sejuani, we could definitely lose. Because if we can't freeze the board out, that can be nasty. We don't really have great counterplay to Hush here, though. So we're just going to go ahead and full attack with everything. It's actually possible he doesn't have enough healing, so even with Hush, he might be able to, you know, survive this round, but might be dying to something like the monkey out up here. Looks like his hand isn't really going to have enough options to survive here. All right, it looks like we're good here. So a big important thing we did there was like open attacking is super, super important against Targon in general because all of their stuff is at slow speed. Like all the stuns, all the Celestials, all the like spells off of the Celestials are all slow speed stuff. So what that means is they're very vulnerable to the idea of getting open attacked like that. So yeah, that's the deck. It's a pretty unique deck. I think it's actually just like pretty underrepresented on ladder in general. It's very fun to play. It's got a pretty unique play style. Because, you know, you're going all in on a champion. Unlike other Sejuani decks, you know, Sejuani is a very powerful champion. She's been used all over the place. But this is the deck that, by far, goes, like, all in on her, tries to make her flip super fast, gets her in the hand super reliably, and just kind of uses her as, like, a big blowout, right? So it's absolutely devastating to, like, aggro decks. It does have a bit of an issue when you get into, like, this super late game, as we saw in that one deep matchup, like, where they were able to slow us down enough. But if you're worried about, you know, just trying to make sure you're beating down the aggros in your ranges, there's not much better you can choose than Turbo Sjeuani. This will absolutely pound out those decks. Alright guys, that's going to be it for this video guide for the Turbo Sjeuani deck. This is my version of Turbo Sjeuani. And yeah, as always, make sure to check the video, not the video description, the pinned comment, because that's where there's going to be an updated version of the list. It might already be looking different from this one here. Alright guys, that's it for me, and I'll see you guys next time.